Okay, welcome back. I'm Cindy Shelton. I'm working through your final exam study guide, and I'm on Chapter 11 now. Chapter 11 is the percentage chapter, and we're going to start with number 49 from the study guide. First of all, know that percent means per 100, so it gives us something to reference in 100 of something, $100, 100 things. So what part of 100 is something is what percent means. Percent means per 100. So anytime something is written in percent form, it's actually divided by 100. And we'll see that as we go through this. All right, so to do number 49 and 50, though, actually you can just take the words and change it into an algebraic statement. What percent would be your unknown variable, and you could use any letter, but I'm going to use P for percent. Of usually means times in algebra, so of is times 338 is, or equals, the verb in the math statement is usually where your equal sign is 202.8. And so it's actually now just an algebraic problem like we've seen in the past, so we can solve this by dividing by what's with our variable. P is multiplied by 338, so if we divide 338, those cancel out, and remember that makes it a 1. So it makes 1P, or just P equals, and that's what we're going for, trying to solve for the variable. What we do to one side, we have to do to the other side, so divide by 338. So we'll punch this in our calculator. And that gives me 0.6. Now this is in its raw form, and its decimal form, so it's not in percent form yet. So we'll need to move it to right to add the percent sign. So over 2 places makes that equivalent to 60%. And then always go back to the prompt, see if this makes sense, if it seems reasonable. Is 60% of 338, 60% would be a little more than half. So a little more than half of 338 is 202, and that does seem reasonable. All right, number 50 is similar, 27%. So now when I put a percent into an equation, we need to do the opposite and change it into its raw form or its decimal form. So to get rid of the percent sign, take it to decimal form, it will be 0.27. And again, all percents are converted into their decimal form whenever we put it into an algebraic equation, unless it's stated otherwise. But normally that's what you do. This times what number? There's the variable, and use whatever letter you like. I'm going to use B for the base of this percent. 27% of what is, there's the equal sign, 135. So now we have an algebraic equation. So now we go into that mode of solving for the variable. That's multiply, so the opposite would be divide. You always divide exactly the same thing that's with your variable, so that divides out to equal a positive 1. So 1b, or b equals, do the same thing to each side and keep the balance, divided by 0.27. And then we type that on a calculator. 135 divided by 0.27 is 500. Again, look back to the problem, say, does that seem reasonable? 27% of 500 would be 135. And I think most of us think or have a frame of reference with 25% being a fourth of something. So about 25% or a fourth of 500 would be 135. So that does seem reasonable. Okay, number 51, a little more application to this one. We have a dress going on sale. It was a $420.58 dress on sale for $370.11. So it says find the percent of decrease in the price of this dress. So first of all, we need to find the amount of decrease. So I subtract to see how much they've taken off the dress. It's $50.47. So that's our amount. So like in the last problem, we could phrase this as saying $50.47 is what percent of the 420.58. Now, how did I know which one of these numbers to use with the up? And that is always based on the before amount. When you do percent of increase or percent of decrease, the percent of change, you go by the original amount. So that's how I need to go to the before amount, 420.58. So again, we're saying the question here is $50.47 would be what percent of that 420.58 it started as. So we can write that in our algebraic form. Is equals what percent, I'm going to call it P, is times 420.58. Then to solve that equation, you divide by what's with the variable, so divide by this 420.58. same thing to each side to keep the balance. Cancels that off, makes that a 1, 1p equals. Type that on your calculator. Comes out to be 0.12 and a bunch of zeros. Almost exactly 12%, but we want to always be careful to round to the exact decimal place that's stated. And our directions tell us to round to the nearest percent, so just the whole percent, no decimal amount needed. But first of all, I do need to convert it into its decimal form. Remember, when you're working in equations, it's always in decimal form instead of in, I should say, percent form. So we need to convert it into percent by going 2 right, and that makes that 12.000. It's almost exactly 12 anyway, but it did say to round to the nearest just whole percent, so 12% is our final answer. All right, number 52 and 53 have to do with simple interest. There's different types of interest we'll see in a couple problems down the road. That we're going to do compound interest, which has a different formula. But simple interest is I equals PRT, or simple interest is the principal, how much you borrowed, or how much you're saving, the total, kind of the base number, the principal, times the rate of interest, times time, which is usually stated in years unless otherwise noted. So we're going to assume that time needs to be in years unless there's special directions. So on number 52, it directly tells us the principal is $480. We've got a 6% interest rate. Remember, we always change our percents to decimals before we put them into the equation. So 2 left makes that 0.06 as a decimal, and then for 4 years. So this one is all on one side. You know, there's really not any equation solving. Everything's on the same side. It's just simplifying that side. So punch that all in your calculator, and you'll know the interest value. 480 times 0.06 times 4 gives me $115.20. We were asked to round to the nearest cent, so that would need to show the 0, 20 cents of that. Okay, number 53. This time, it's not all on the same side. I don't know the principal rate and time. I know the interest, so I know the left side of the equation. The I value is $100 interest, would be $600 principal at what percent, that's our unknown value, and 9 years. So I'm looking for R in this problem. So I will need to incorporate a little algebra this time, divide by what's with the variable. But first of all, this is multiplied on this side. All that is a multiplication problem. So go ahead and multiply the 600 times 9 and make that 5,400 with the R, times R. To get it simplified down as much as you can. You should always do that in equation solving. Then divide by what's with the variable. Divide by 5,400, each side keeping the balance to get R equals. And then we punch that on our calculator. 100 divided by 5,400 is 0.0185185, on. So the directions tell me to round to the nearest something, I'm sure, to the nearest cent. To the nearest hundredths. Sorry, I lost my place there. Round to the nearest hundredths. So I'm going to first of all change it into a percent because I'm looking for the rate. So that's a percentage. So 2 places over makes that 1 point. And then the part after it's where I'm going to evaluate the hundredths place. So then that would be the next place, tenths, hundredths. So the 1 is the value that tells me whether to round up or not. So I need to go 3 more places out. So I don't round up, so that stays 85. Now in percent form to the nearest hundredths of a percent. Okay, number 54, another simple interest problem. We've got 5,700 principal at a 5.5 percentage rate, so I go 2 left to make it 0.055, and for 3 years. So all of that is on the right side. It just needs to be simplified or multiplied together. So 5,700 times 0.055 times 3 is $940.50. And this is the problem I was looking at earlier. Tells you to fill in separately. The interest is, that's the interest amount, And then it has a B part that says find the total amount that's due. We're saying this is a loan. You've taken out a $5,700 loan at 5.5% for 3 years. The interest, the money that you had to pay for that use of that money is $940 in interest and 50 cents. And so the total amount that you will owe, you'll owe your $5,700 back, of course, plus the interest that you were charged, $940.50. So the total amount owed, the B part of this, is $6,640.50.